So back in April of 2007, the McCann family, which would be the parents and 3 kids, decided to go on a family trip to Portugal. During that time, Madeleine went missing. Now, if you would like to be able to see the full details of the incident itself, I'll link it below in the description so you can read it. There are a lot of people that are suspicious of the McCann parents because of how they act shortly after their child's disappearance. Now, just to be clear, there have been some updates to the case. They think that they may have found the person, but I'm also not so certain about that, but we'll get into that. So this interview was taken 22 days after the disappearance of Madeleine. Her parents called for this interview with Sky, and it's odd, to say the least. I spent a lot of hours just trying to establish a baseline for the McCann parents, and I was tentatively able to do just that. Something that I'm keeping in mind during all of this is that both of them are doctors, and doctors are often encouraged to be able to mask their emotions, so this could be in part the reason of their subdued nature. Regardless, you'll see this interview, like I said, 3 weeks after their child has disappeared, and they seem very, very, very subdued. Let's watch.
Jerry and Kate, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. I'd like to begin by taking you back to the events of May the 3rd on that evening. Tell us how you discovered that Madeleine had gone.
As I think people are aware, we were checking regularly on children, and it was during one of my checks that I discovered she'd gone. I mean, I can't really go into any details about that, but I'm sure any parent will realise how that felt.
Did the panic set in immediately?
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, let's talk about Kate here for a second. So her tone in her voice, it sounds very fragile, almost very gentle, maybe tired would be a way of putting it, and all of those sorts of things make sense in the context in which they're given. She's very, very subdued. Like I said, you'll see this from both of them, is that they're very subdued in general. There's not a lot of emotional consternation happening. To be fair, nobody really knows how they will react to this sort of situation until they're in it. So since I haven't been in this situation, I can't say, oh, well, they're obviously wrong, because I don't know. That could be how I'd react. That could be how you'd react. This could be how they're reacting if their child went missing. So right now, speaking non-verbally, there's not much to go off of. She's had some expressions as she's going through the recount of how things were playing out that night, but there's no possible signs of deceit in here. There's no nonverbal misalignments or anything along those lines to be able to look out for. I do believe that they did check on their kids regularly. From what she's saying, she's not showing that she's trying to hide anything from that point. Let's keep watching.
This is a resort that offers childcare facilities, babysitting facilities. Why then were the 3 young children left alone in the apartment while you were having a meal?
I mean, I think if you know the location here, which you've seen, what we did, I think, and we've been reassured by the fact in the thousands of messages from people who've either done exactly the same or said they would have done the same. And for us, it really wasn't very much different to having dinner in your garden and the proximity of the location. I think it's fair to say that, the guilt that we feel having not been there at that moment, irrespective of whether we had been in the other bedroom or not, will never leave us.
Okay, so from what I'm getting from Jerry's stuff here is that I'm getting a lot of anger tells in there, perhaps a little bit of pain after he says this part here.
We've either done exactly the same or said they would have done the same. And
you can see this little micro expression of pain that he flashes. Also, these multiple lip compressions and clenched jaws that he's saying while he's stating this. He's very frustrated. And now I don't know how much exact media attention they've got at this point, but they did call for this interview, which leads me to believe that they should be prepared for important questions like this, like why on earth would you leave your kids in a bedroom while going away to drink with a table, that I've heard from other reports that their table was louder than some of the other ones. There were more drinks consumed. All in all, it just seems like a fairly bad decision to leave your kids in that sort of situation in a place that you haven't been. But like they said, it's a safe resort. It has been known to be a safe resort, so it's not out of the ordinary. And I'm sure that there are a lot of parents who have done similar things, but not a lot of parents have had their kids taken during this time either. So his frustration at this question already is odd to me. Why would you be frustrated at that so early on when you called for this interview? Doesn't make sense to me. Let's keep watching.
Do you blame yourselves regularly?
Certainly the first few days, I think the guilt was very difficult. But I think as time goes on, we feel stronger, and we felt very supported from that point of view.
I'm actually going to pause it after each of these questions so I can talk about how they respond to them, because they're pretty rapid fire, pretty rapidly answered as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. For those of you who are parents, I am not a parent, so I am not going to try to assume what your emotions are towards your kids without any grounds. You would be upset that your kid was gone. If they were taken, you would probably feel guilty for some time, not 2 days. Not 2 days. They were upset for 2 days and felt guilty for 2 days that this happened. And then after that, they were like, yeah, no, we felt pretty strong after that. We felt strong after 2 days. That sends a red flag to me, just speaking emotionally. Once again, they're doctors. They have to be able to process and work through their emotions regularly because it's important and critical in their actual day-to-day job. So that could be spilling out here, and that's something that I'm keeping in mind. However, I'm also keeping in mind that they are human and that their kid disappeared while they were drinking with their friend. I would feel horrible guilt as a parent if I were in their shoes, but that's just me trying to speak secondhand. If you're here and you're a parent, please let me know in the comments. Would you be okay after 2 days, or would you be frustrated, guilty, scared, ashamed? Should I go on about what happened? Let me know.
Is there a lesson here, do you think, to other parents?
I think that's a very difficult thing to say, because if you look at it and we try to rationalise things in our head, and ultimately what is done, and we do continually look forward, but we've tried to put it into some sort of perspective for ourselves. We're in a very safe resort. If you think about the millions and millions of British families who go to the Mediterranean each year, really the chances of this happening are in the order of 100 million to 1.
I think at worst we were naive. We're very responsible parents. We love our children very much. And I don't think any parent could ever imagine or consider anything like this happening.
So with Jerry's body language, once again, a lot of anger is showing up here. Now, this is partially because of how his eyebrows actually naturally rest. It could be seen as being angry for people. Also, it almost looks like he's constantly upset. I've taken that into consideration. What I'm referring to in his frustration signals are a lot of the lip compressions and jaw clenching that happens while he's speaking. It shows up, and that's a sign of frustration. If somebody is clenching their jaw and doing a lot of lip compressions as he's doing there, they're frustrated about the situation. He's very defensive about what's going on. Now, there's two reasons that this could possibly be. One reason could be is that they're actually innocent. They had nothing that they did wrong besides maybe being a little bit neglectful, but nothing beyond that. He's feeling very attacked, and he feels that it's unjust. That could be the reason. The other reason that he's being so defensive could possibly be because they had something happen or they did something, and he doesn't want that pried into, so he's frustrated that it's already getting to that point. On her side of things, if you watch her body language while she's talking about this stuff, she does a lot of eye blocking and nose shakes. Now, I've talked about these at length on the channel before, and you know how ambiguous these can be, and it's really reliant on the context of the situation. While she's shaking her head no, this could be attached to negative thoughts around the entire thing. Now, I want to also be clear, since there's a lot of you from all over the world on this, this is speaking culturally towards the UK culture and American culture as well. The yes and no's are yeses and no's. Across different cultures, this is different. Across different neurological types, this is different. So in their situation, this seems to make sense in that sense. However, it's also odd that she's describing things that you would assume would be needless to say. We're very good parents. This is very safe. I don't think that anybody could imagine what we're going through. Why would you state that? I'm not actually going to go into the verbal analysis of this because somebody else already has. I've linked it below. There is a statement analyst. And what they do is they go in and they'll take statements, be it verbal or written down, and they analyze them. They really do pick them apart and think about the psychology behind them and why things are said, when they're said, how they're said. And he brings up some excellent points. For instance, this analyst believes solidly that the McCann parents had something to do with the disappearance of Madeleine. So if you want to watch that, I'd suggest watching it below. It's like 2 hours long though, so consider that. But non-verbally speaking, she's doing a lot of no shakes, a lot of blocking gestures while saying that they're good parents and that nobody can understand what they're going through. This could be negative feelings. This could be a sign of her really not believing what she's saying. Both are plausible. We're going to keep watching and see which one is most plausible.
Were you aware of the big public debate that went on in the immediate aftermath, and were you hurt by that?
Yeah, I mean, no one hurts you as much as the hurt that we had.
I'm actually going to comment real quick. So to rephrase, in case you didn't understand what the question was, he more or less asked, there was a large spike of controversy around this specific instance, and a lot of people are pointing fingers at them, and they said, did that hurt your feelings? She hesitates. You would think that the response to that would be, yeah, that hurt our feelings. We didn't do this, and they're attacking us for that. So she hesitates, and then she looks away, she shakes her head slightly and says, yeah, with a shrug. Speaking non-verbally, that is a clear indicator of an absolute lack of certainty in what she was saying. My question is, why? Why would there be a lack of certainty on if you were hurt by people saying that you did a thing that you didn't do, a very bad thing that you didn't do? And she's like, yeah. Really? Really? Yeah? So her nonverbal communication during this instance is odd. His is staying pretty constant all the way through, which I found to be regular. He's very in control of his emotive states, and it's very hard to get a read on him. She's been the more telling one nonverbally from what I've seen, but it's time to keep analyzing.
But, we've tried to remain very positive in our outlook, and even small levels of criticism make that hard when you're trying to do everything in your power to get your daughter back.
Heavy eye blocking during all of that. He does blink more regularly, Jerry does. However, it just sticks out as odd at these points that he's doing eye blocking so strongly. Why is once again the question, and then you have to watch and try to understand why certain things are happening. It's just interesting to me.
I know you've been very supportive of the Portuguese police investigation, but is there anything that you feel could have been done better, particularly in those crucial first 24 hours when Madeleine was missing and perhaps it was treated as a simple missing child as opposed to an abduction?
I think, we are not looking at what has been done, and I don't think it helps at this stage to look back at what could and couldn't have been done. I think it's fair to say we expected a very British-style response that you would expect if you were in a big metropolitan city. You have to put it in context. They were in a tiny resort. But, that aside, the times for these lessons to be learned will be after the investigation is finished and not now. It's an ongoing investigation which has huge resources both from Portuguese and the British. They've working very, very closely with lots of expert help. And I know there's hundreds of pieces of information continuing to come forward. And I would strongly like to emphasise we would like anyone who's been in here in the 2 weeks leading up to the abduction to come forward if they have not already done so and upload their photographs, because we want Madeleine back and people can still influence that.
The police in this situation, if you go and read and you go and watch all of these extra deals, I suggest you just go watch the documentary. That'll help you get an understanding of some of it. The police investigation for that first very crucial period, the first 24 to 48 hours is a very important time during a possible child abduction or abduction in any case. That's a very important time, and the police and law enforcement in the area at that time did apparently a not super swell job. So when he dodges that question about being like, we're not looking at the past, we're not interested in the past right now, he's just being polite to the current law enforcement, because it it really wasn't super well done. A lot of people walked all over the crime scene. It was very contaminated. It was very hard to look at and to be able to get any information from. Poorly handled. All the way around, poorly handled. So that's part of that reason here. Also, during this time, while he's talking about asking people to come forward and bring pictures and do all this stuff, he's doing a lot of, once again, eye blocking and nose shaking. However, when he does say he wants his daughter back, he does do an affirmative head nod as well. So these are some kind of contradicting nonverbal patterns here. There's a couple ways that I could look at this as an analyst and interpret this. Either one, the nose shakes before, they're just nose shakes, nothing to really read into them. And the nod is, or perhaps those no shakes, told a little bit more than we initially thought. Right now, we're getting a pretty good understanding as to where things are going. So hopefully as this interview continues, and it's not very long, hopefully we'll be able to have a decently painted picture.
Looking back, I mean, did you see anything suspicious in the days leading up to her abduction? Did you notice anything? Have you been racking your brains to try to think whether people might have been watching?
We didn't.
If we did, we would tell you because it may be important information, but we didn't, you know. It was such a relaxing.
This is a good question. It's a straightforward question, and he asked it largely because you would expect the answer to be yes. You know, my child was taken while in my care, and they didn't rack their brains trying to think about who or what or why or when or how this could have happened. They just sat there and did nothing. They were just like, you know what? Our kid's gone. Cool, so I'll have another beer, please. Thank you. What? You didn't think about it at all? Why? Why? Once again, why? But also, during that, non-verbally, when he asked that question, both of them looked down. Both of them are looking down. This is a shame thing. They divert their eyes. It's really hard to look into somebody's eyes when you're ashamed of something. That's a very common thing, is as soon as shame comes in, a look away will happen. And during this time, when he asks a question, which the answer, I'm going to go out on a limb here, the answer should be yes. Their answer should be absolutely yes. Sleepless nights. Couldn't think of what or why or how. Their body language right now, besides it being extremely subdued, is not really helping them seem innocent. But they're innocent until proven guilty, and I'm going to continue on through the rest of the video to see if we can kind of collect this mass picture of who they are in relation to this incident.
Holiday, and in fact, as a family unit, up until that night, and with the friends we were here, certainly for us, it was as good a holiday as we have had with the children up until that point.
Okay. At the very end, he does an extreme mouth shrug and look down. The verbal interpretation of this is, I don't know. It's not appropriate is the biggest thing. This isn't an appropriate response to this question, and it sticks out once again as a red flag non-verbally.
You have to keep believing that Madeleine is still going to be found alive and well.
Absolutely. We
do you ever, though, allow yourself to drift towards negative thoughts?
I think in the early days we did, and I think that's inevitable. I think any parent who's been through this does that, certainly in the first few days. We don't now. We're actually a lot stronger, a lot more hopeful now. And we have to be hopeful. It's what keeps us going and keeps us focused.
Okay, Kate does a lot of partial shrugs. This is a sign of insecurity or uncertainty, where she's saying, we don't now, but we did maybe a little bit earlier on. Once again, I must put myself in their shoes. 22 days earlier. It hasn't been a month. It's the same month. And they're already moved past the feelings of, is the worst happening? Is this the worst case scenario? They're already moved past that. They're so certain that she'd been taken. We're going to talk some about some of the questions that she didn't answer towards the end of this video. There's not any footage of it because it was part of the initial police investigation that I don't have the footage from, which is unfortunate. And then we'll summarize at the very end. But just odd nonverbal reactions to this, odd reactions to this in general. We'll see if those continue happening.
And what about Sean and Emily? What have you said to them about their big sister?
They're really good. I mean, they're at an age really where they're still quite young and...
All right. She's acting so nonchalant about it. She's like, they're really good. She literally does that expression. You know, they're really good. They're doing all right. Oh, cool. Why are you though? This is my big question. How are you okay? How are you all right? But I've already said that. We're going to keep reading.
I guess it hasn't had the same impact on them as if they were a little bit older. They do talk about Madeleine. They pick up things and say,
Impact on them? What about impact on you? That's my concern. Impact on you, the parent. You're saying that they're fine. I'm looking at you and you're acting like you're fine. Why? Why would you possibly be fine? How could you possibly be fine?
Madeleine's, and that's fine, but they're really good.
I think that's, something that is, many people have said to us that this is a parent's worst nightmare. And it is. It truly is. And it's as bad as you can possibly imagine. But if all three of the children had been taken.
What was all of that? That was a lot of nonverbal action right there in his face, a lot of looking down, deep breath, going, is that a response to his worst nightmare, as people are saying, to have your child taken from you? Or is that a response towards his deceit? It's unclear right now, but he wasn't comfortable with that. Nonverbally, that's what it's saying, to look down and have that cringe expression. It's very common to have that all happen. Then he's really not comfortable with that entire aspect of it. And the question once again is, why? Are you not comfortable with it because it's an uncomfortable situation? Or are you not comfortable with it because it's not true and you want out? We'll see.
It could have been even worse than your worst nightmare. And we've got to be strong for them. They're here. They do bring you back to earth. And we cannot, grieve. One, we did grieve, of course we grieve, but ultimately we need to be in control so that we can influence and help in any way possible. Not just Sean and Amelie, but the investigation.
So that's a fair point on their part. They want to be in control and maybe they're not allowing themselves to grieve. If this is the case, perhaps they're not allowing themselves to grieve yet, which is possible. They could actually have dissociated from that instance themselves, thrown up walls about it. Perhaps they're still dealing with some psychological shock from the instance, and that could be that emotional detachment from the instance itself. That could be very, very true. So that's something that I'm keeping in mind as I'm reading, is that these are all possibilities. There's going to be a lot of possibilities. The biggest thing is finding the truth. And that's why, to be very frank, a nonverbal analyst will work hard with other analysts, with other investigators, to be able to come to the truth. A nonverbal analyst can't decide the truth themselves. So anything that I say or state here would rely on other people to be able to affirm or deny that statement. So just keep that in mind. So at the end of this, whatever I say, that's just what my opinion is, educated on what I've seen. There has to be more than just one person saying this. So don't take this as like, oh, well, this person said it, so obviously it's going to be true. You have to look at the bulk of all the evidence. And from what I've seen so far, right now, I still don't have enough to go off of to be able to say, oh, they absolutely did it or they absolutely didn't. That's just something that I want to throw out there for some of you who might be hoping for a guaranteed answer here. To be very frank and unfortunate, it probably won't happen on a YouTube video.
And because of them, the day may come when you have to leave here and go back to the UK. I know you've got no plans to do so at the moment. But how do you think you're going to feel if that day comes and you have to go to the airport and fly back?
I can't think about that, Ian, to be honest. I can't think about going home without Madeleine. So.
Interesting. So when she says, I can't do this thing, she's shaking her head no, like you would expect her to do. I won't do this thing. I can't think about doing this thing. I can't. No shake, no words. All aligned. This just forces me to keep in mind the fact that earlier when she shook her head no while saying a positive thing, that is a possible nonverbal misalignment. The reason for that isn't certain, but it could absolutely be there, in that we've seen her now say something negative and shake her head no as well.
I notice you've got Madeleine's cuddly toy with you as always. How did that start and what comfort does it bring you?
Where did it come from? Or?
No, how did the idea come to just have it in your hands all the time?
Well, it's something that Madeleine has with her every night, and if she's upset or not well, then she has Cuddle Cat, and so it provided me with a little bit of comfort. It's something of Madeleine close to me.
Interesting. So verbally speaking, I know that this is a nonverbal channel and we're supposed to focus on that, and I get that, but verbally speaking, she uses present tense with Madeleine, which really does assume that she is still there. She's still alive. She's still able to be found. So that's a good verbal cue for their innocence, is if they're speaking present tense like that. If she had said, this is a little piece of Madeleine. She used to carry this with her. She would have that in her bed before, past tense sort of things. It's this idea, this separation of past and present, that would show that they might believe that she's actually dead. So that sort of situation, that's a good verbal cue for their honesty. However, this is one verbal cue for their honesty against a lot of really suspicious body language. So it's just something that I'm keeping in mind instead of being like, ha, innocent, right away. So let's keep watching.
This is International Missing Children's Day. I mean, I guess Madeleine's had more publicity than just about every missing child in the world put together. I'm sure you're very grateful for that. Why do you think it has provoked such enormous public support, of which I don't think we've ever seen before?
I think there's a conglomeration of circumstances that have come together in this situation. The fact that we're on holiday, very safe resort, recognised for that. And of course, the world has changed in terms of information technology and the speed of response, in terms of the media coming here and us being prepared to some extent, use that to try and influence the campaign. But above all else, it's touched everyone. Everyone. You don't have to be a parent for this to have a major impact on you. And I think it's also been very, very important. And some of the things which we have done and said, which we didn't realise what impact they would have, but so many thousands of people are doing small things to help us find Madeleine, because the worst feeling was helplessness. The absolute worst, that we had no bearing on finding her.
All right, so I know that the answer isn't over to the question yet, but there are some important things that I want to talk about. So he's shaking his head a lot during this as well. And it's not really a positive or negative during this time. It's what I refer to as the unbelief shake. And this is common in times of people recollecting or talking about things that are unbelievable. Literally, it's I can't believe it. And that's where the no is coming from. Most of the time, a no shake will match a thought process. So if you see somebody that's doing a no shake, there is a thought process behind it that's causing that to happen. The biggest thing is figuring out what that thought process is. In this instance, with this line of talking that he's doing here, it makes sense that it would be the unbelievable one. It's unbelievable the response that people have had. This isn't a sign of deceit or honesty or anything. This is just a reflection of psychological processing on the nonverbal communication that's being displayed. So that's what I'm feeling in here. He's not blocking anything. He's not doing anything odd. It's such an interesting art form, reading nonverbal communication and interpreting it correctly. Seeing patterns like this, the only reason that I know that this pattern exists isn't because that there's a book out there that says it. It's because I've seen it on repeat many, many, many times before. The unbelief no shake. There is definitely a learning curve and an art to reading nonverbal communication. There's so many possible interpretations. The biggest thing that sets analysts apart are how accurate they are. So that's where this is here. We're going to keep watching. This is already a pretty healthy video, right? Pretty healthy.
Once you start to do that, then you start to feel a bit better. And I hope we're going to look back at the end of all this and say that we have done everything in our power, but also that other people are helping in so many other ways and they feel that they are part of it.
Does it worry you that people might start to lose interest as time goes on? The media coverage diminishes inevitably?
For me, we know that the media coverage is not going to last a long time. It's lasted much longer and we have been much, much more successful in driving our message out than we could ever possibly have imagined. Personally, I think it's gone beyond that at the minute, and that there is a feeling with many, many people out there that they will not allow this to happen. And we know that, and we pray that it doesn't happen again, but when it does, the speed of the next response and the template we have set will alter it. And there has been so much goodwill and humanity out there that it really has restored, that one evil act actually has resulted in so much good.
Where do you go from here? There's talk of travelling around Europe. Have you got any firm plans as yet?
We haven't got any firm plans. We're likely to travel in a few places in Europe. But as yet, no definite plans.
But you've got no plans to go back to the UK for the foreseeable future?
No.
I think that everybody has just been incredibly impressed with you as a couple and how you've dealt with this. There was a period after a week or so where you looked as if you were almost broken, and who could not understand that. And then there seemed to be a sort of strength come from somewhere. Is that a fair point? Is that what happened, and what brought that about?
I think that's definitely true, isn't it?
Certainly, at the end of that first week, there was so much emotion that we had spent, and we actually had a period where we discussed this openly, that we felt completely devoid of emotion. And the analogy that I like to use is a bit like when we were students and you got to your overdraft limit and you'd gone beyond it and there was just nothing left in the tank. I think physically and mentally were shattered. But as you gradually get more on an even keel, we started to get back into the black. And we'd also worked tirelessly behind the scenes to put support mechanisms in place, including our legal team, the response with the fund, which was really driven by offers rather than us thinking that we needed it. And once these were in place, then it helped us to focus on what we really needed to focus on.
All right, so during all of that, there weren't any nonverbal signs of deceit. Once again, there's a lot of head shaking, and it makes sense that that would be in relation to the unbelievableness of the situation rather than any sort of nonverbal misalignment. Along with that, he looks down a lot, but if you notice throughout the entire interview, he does look down a lot, and the times that he does look down weren't at any points of possible deceit. There weren't hot points centered around these down looks that could indicate possible shame or eye blocking or anything along those lines. Now, he brings up the idea of this emotional exhaustion that they felt, and that's very true. In a grieving period, there is that point where you have burned everything. You've literally gone through all of the emotion you can, and you're drained. You're completely exhausted. That's a very natural, very normal thing. They could be going through that. The other possibility is that's as long as they could really keep up their intense grief act, and after that, their strength that overcame them was really just how they felt the entire time, and they couldn't keep up their act anymore. It's also possible, it's a lot darker picture if you look at it that way. I'm hoping that it's not that. It's, honest to goodness, it's terrible to hear when a parent will do something terrible to their child. So I'm hoping that's not the case. We just have to see what we see and try to interpret from there.
Well, everyone who's watching, who's been following Madeleine's case over the past 3 weeks, just wishes you all the best. Thanks very much, Jerry. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Okay, this is what I'll say about their body language. It was indeed suspicious. I understand why people are looking at them and being like, what on earth is wrong with these people? And I get that. I get that deeply. The things that I will point out is, one, they are doctors. They are trained to maintain their emotions, to be able to think critically and process well during stressful, both emotionally stressful and just psychologically stressful in general situations. So that sort of training could be kicking in this instance. They could just be relying on their training and ability to fall back on that, to dissociate from the bad, to be able to function best. There is that possibility. I personally, just judging from what I've seen, which, like I said, I only showed one interview out of hours and hours of footage that I've watched, trying to be able to establish who these people are. I don't think that they did it. I just don't. I know that that might not be the most interesting interpretation, but I'm not here to make interesting interpretations. I'm here to say what I see. So I don't think they did it. What I feel like they are guilty of, because they are certainly guilty, but I think what they're guilty of is just some neglectful parenting. I don't think they're the best parents, but not my place to say. I'm not a parent. If you're a parent and you looked at this situation, would you do this? Would you go to a country that you haven't been to before and leave your kids in a motel that is close by, but you cannot see inside for multiple hours while you drink, although you are checking on them regularly? Apparently the door was unlocked to the motel, and the checks weren't very reliable, to say the least. Now, along with that, there is some evidence that people have found and said were pretty damning towards them. Some reports say that they found blood and the scent of a corpse through a very reliable sniffer dog that had a very good track record for discovering and unearthing similar situations. And they say that the sniffer dog found those remnants of odors in the apartment room or in the hotel room that they had. So that was a big question of mine, but I wasn't able to find enough on that. Along with that, they have found a possible suspect who was a known criminal in this aspect, in this arena, and he was nearby, apparently. I haven't been able to find too much on that either. So there are multiple other options as to what could have happened. There are a lot of views. I do suggest you go and watch the statement analysis that I mentioned earlier. It's in the description below. It's a very good point of view. And he has some points where it feels like he's reaching, which I understand. But then there are some other points to where he makes some very solid arguments for the parents being guilty. And what his standing is that they didn't kill their daughter specifically. He believes that something happened and it was an accident and they're trying to cover it up. And so I mentioned earlier that there were a whole pile of questions that were asked of them that were not answered. And it was asked specifically of Kate. And the good questions. I mean, really good, important questions that she chose not to answer. Questions like, how come you immediately knew that it was an abduction? How did you know that your child didn't just leave? There was no answer. There was a question of, how come you immediately ran to tell everybody at the restaurant, leaving your twins in the same room that one was just taken from, that one of your kids was just taken from? No answer to that either. And there's a whole long list. There were 48 or 49 questions that she didn't answer. And then there was one that she did answer, and that was, you realize that by not answering these questions, you are inhibiting an investigation, correct? And she's like, I won't answer these if this is the line of the investigation. Which could be she's offended that they're questioning her, or she's scared that they're questioning her. Okay, so as I mentioned, I have already done one video on this case. If you would like to be able to hear the backstory of it and have some more information for this video, I suggest going and watching that one. I've linked it in the description of this video so you can find it pretty easily. With that being said, since that provides the background, I'll go ahead and just dive directly into this more recent interview than the one that I did prior to this. It's fascinating. It is a little cut up. There are some edits that were made in the original documentary that I pulled this interview from, so it's going to be a little hit and miss here and there, but we'll still glean what information we can from it. Anyways, let's dive in.
You all happy? Ready to...
Yeah.
When Jerry and Kate McCann sat down with Sunday night, it was the happy memories of Madeleine they wanted to share.
She was an incredibly beautiful baby, actually. And
you sound like the most biased parents on the planet now, but she was just really compact and just a really kind of nice, round, perfect head, and and then she opened her mouth, and the whole world knew she was with us.
She had McCann level volume. There's no doubt about that.
She's a screamer right from the start.
She was really sweet.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm going to go ahead and pause here. So there's not too much that can be gleaned from this initial portion here. First, I want to make note, if you saw the prior video, they're already emoting, or at least Kate McCann is emoting a little bit more than she was in the initial video, which what was interesting to me is the initial video that I did was based off of the interview that happened only a couple weeks after the disappearance of their daughter. So we're seeing more emotion from loosely both of them in this than we saw the prior time. Now, they address that later on in this interview, but what I want to also make note is they're talking about how they want to mention only the happy things about Madeleine, and they seem to almost objectify her. She was a great shape. She looked really cute and compact, and then she opened her mouth and everybody knew she was there, kind of thing, and there was almost this level of shade towards how perhaps Madeleine behaved, but a lot of direction and intensity put upon how she appeared. It's just a fascinating dynamic that they're talking about here. It seems as though they just missed the look of their child, perhaps not as much the effect of their child, but that's pretty loosely stating here, and there's nothing nonverbally to really go off of that. We'll unpack more of the nonverbal as we go through.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was a secret really that I always wanted to be a mother. I don't know if maybe that stemmed from being an only child and sort of, wanting that feeling of family. So yeah, I mean, even when I was in school and stuff, my friends were aware of it, and in my university medical book yearbook, when we graduated, it says prognosis, mathematician, mother of 6.
You say the
Gonna go ahead and pause there. So during that time, Kate is obviously talking about her proclivity towards wanting children, and I was not able to track down any information on Jerry's side whether or not he wanted children. And so I would believe Kate during this area. There is a regular look off to the side as she's recollecting various portions of things, which I've mentioned multiple times here on the channel, that directional IQs, which is the concept of when a person looks in a certain direction in their plane of sight, then that could indicate either falsified or genuine recollection and memory based off the various senses. That can be relied on in some circles, but it's not a universal thing, and I haven't been able to establish that with Kate, so I'm not going to be relying on her looking off to the side being some sort of inauthentic what have you. So that's in there. She is still emoting, but the thing that sticks out to me is as she's beginning to talk about how unbelievable or how you wouldn't believe, she has a micro no shake in there, which is synchronized with that as well. And she has a fairly specific story about how she earned this nickname growing up through school and going through school, about how her friends knew that she wanted kids, and that pushes me towards authenticity towards her, and we'll see some disconnect between the two of them as this goes on. Now, in the last video that I did, I landed on the final opinion that I don't believe that they did something nefarious to their child to cause Madeleine's disappearance or anything along those lines. There are some areas in this that make me question that opinion, and kind of forced me to revisit what I was seeing before and add some context to it. However, already we're seeing a little bit more emotion from Kate during this, and the smile that she's having as she's talking about implementing children into her life seems to be genuine as well as it starts to reach her eyes. Now, neither of them are overtly emotive people to begin with, so we need to keep that in mind in their general baseline. But we're already getting some information from this already, and right now it's still lining up with what we saw in the prior one, albeit still, like I said, an interesting separation between the emotional displays of each interview. Let's continue.
You say the family felt really complete.
Yeah, we did feel incredibly lucky.
You didn't want to go to Portugal.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't for any kind of major reason. I just thought, we had 3 very young children, and I was just thinking practically, I just wasn't sure really if it was worth that effort, if it would be as enjoyable.
As it turned out, the kids loved it.
So Kate is saying that she didn't see that it was very worth it to make the entire trip as they did. Again, Jerry stays quiet in this area. I'm not sure if this is due to the editing of the interview. Perhaps he interjects here. Perhaps he doesn't. He stays fairly silent throughout a good, decent portion of what I was able to pull out of this documentary, and I still find that fascinating. The areas that he does chime in on seem to be a little bit revealing, and as we continue through this, and as I continued through the research of this, I started to see 2 different sides to this possible story, and you'll just have to see as we continue.
The kids loved it.
All the kids were playing together and they were running around saying, chase, chase. And Madeleine especially, she loved getting chased and me running after her.
You explained that it wasn't like you were taking a risk by leaving the kids there. It never for 1 second occurred to you that anything would take place.
That's right. I mean, we always talk about the decision we made, but that almost implies that you talked about, do you think that'll be okay or not? I mean, that never came into it. It was a case of, we can eat here. That'll be ideal. The kids' evening won't be disruptive. We'll get them sorted and then we can all eat. I mean, it was simply like that. If there'd been any risk at all that had occurred to us, then it just wouldn't have happened.
Kate told me about...
I'm going to go ahead and pause here. So with this, I still, even with them reiterating this, which they iterated this in the original interview, they're reiterating this in multiple other areas. Verbally speaking and just cognitively speaking, it's hard for me to conceive of how they don't see the innate risk of leaving your children, your very young children, completely unattended, late at night, with doors unlocked to your room, in a just a foreign country. And it seems interesting to me. I have seen many people even comment things like, I can't bring myself to leave my cell phone in my room unlocked. And I myself, having traveled as much as I have, I always lock my room just in general. And that's just with stuff, with items, things that you could just purchase. I can't get myself into the mindset of comfortably leaving my child in an unlocked room at night when I'm not near them. And I don't have children, and I know that many of you watching this do have children. And if you do, please let me know in the comments of this video. Is this something that you have come into the situation of, where you go to a resort that you've never been to in a foreign country, and then you leave your children very young, under 5 years old, in the room, in the suite by themselves, and go off drinking? And they say it's in clear line of sight, which is true, but only partially. You could only see a portion of the actual room from where they were sitting. And the portion that you can see is a closed window and wall area. So it's not really a way to keep an eye on the room. It just seems as though they were saying, oh, well, we could see the room, so things were obviously going to be okay. So this is just one of those areas that I have difficulty coming to terms with, just processing psychologically for myself. So again, if you've been in a similar situation, let us all know in the comments below why you did or didn't do those things, and if you would feel comfortable doing something similarly at a resort that you've never been to. Just fascinating. Let's continue.
Tell me about that afternoon and that evening. Madeleine said she'd had a great day.
Yeah, no, she'd had a really full day, actually. You know, they'd been to the beach and had I think they called it mini sail. So she'd been on a little boat or a dinghy or something. But my memory of that evening is really vivid. I mean, she was really tired, but she was just cuddled up on my knee, and we read a story, which, as Jerry said, is one of her favourites. And she often liked to put on my engagement ring. So she was sitting there with my, ring on, and we read the story. We also had some treats. We had some crisps and biscuits. And then after they'd done the usual kind of toilet teeth, we went through to the bedroom and read another story, If You're Happy and You Know It. Yeah.
Okay, pausing here again. So this entire recollection, Kate is giving a lot of very specific details about the proceedings of that day. And during that time, she's consistently looking down into the same area that she has been this entire time, which I would attribute to her actual recollection and memory process rather than, like I said, this possible form of deceit. You can also hear a fair bit of unsteadiness in her breathing as she has some shaky breaths in. This could be an indicator of either nerves. It could also be an indicator of grief and sadness. Both of those would kind of make sense contextually in here. But what I'm more interested in during this point is the incredible amount of detail that she recalls. Now, with traumatic events, it seems as though they can function on two different spectrums, so to speak, where either one, during a traumatic or around a traumatic event, some of the details are seared into your mind in crystal clear detail. You can't get them out. And then in other times, it seems as though you can't remember times during traumatic events, and oftentimes it will switch back and forth or depend day to day and event to event. So we're seeing that. I'm not gathering that this is a packing of a narrative. She's not offering what seems to be a bunch of excuses. She's offering details for that day that add to the story or the question that was asked by the interviewer. To me, that seems more authentic. Again, what I'm gathering from Kate here is perhaps a level of genuine grief and remorse about losing her child that day and having these very vivid, detailed memories seared into her mind, even down to which storybooks that they're reading, things along those lines. And then at the very end, we see a bit of a lip compression with the pulling to the corner of the mouth there, and that's fascinating to me as well. Lip compressions can be biting back of negative words or emotions. The pulling of the corner of the mouth also seems to indicate a level of negative emotion as well. So we're getting these fairly negative emotions and seems to be fairly consistent memories from Kate. And all of this time, again, Jerry is staying fairly silent. He will become more active throughout this interview. And as that continues to happen, that's where some of these interesting parallels start to pop up. So let's keep watching.
I saw her and I had one of those parental moments where I thought, God, we're so lucky. Look at her, 3 children, having a lovely holiday. Kids were really enjoying it, and I just lingered for a few seconds and thought how beautiful she was.
And
that's the last time I saw her.
So during that, again, we're seeing the same sort of pulling to the corners of the mouth there that we mentioned with Kate, indicating a negative emotion, and then an eye roll in there coupled with that. So that eye roll is fairly dismissive, and I'm wondering what that negative emotion and eye roll is related to. Verbally speaking, he's mentioning how he had those moments of everything's so perfect, and perhaps that's where that dismissive eye roll with the negative emotion related to that is actually in relation to. So perhaps he's indicating non-verbally that he was misled by that moment. Perhaps throughout the rest of that, he stays fairly inactive non-verbally across his face. We're not seeing a lot of emotion displaying in the upper half of his face or the lower half of his face. In the prior video, we mentioned how his brow rests regularly. His eyebrows are regularly a little bit pulled together and a little bit lowered. It gives him almost an air of anger, perhaps, but it's not something that is standing as an outlier, so it's not something that we can relate a direct emotion to it. It's just part of his baseline. So that's staying consistent here. Along with that, he keeps a little bit of activity in the corner of the right side of his nose here, which if it were an outlier, it would push me towards disgust. But again, it's resting in his face regularly, so it's part of his baseline, so it doesn't necessarily have an emotive response to that. What then strikes me as more interesting is when he's mentioning how she appeared, that he has a little micro nose shake in there that seems to be possibly desynchronized with what he was saying. So perhaps there was some form of negative emotion around that. It's so small and it's so brief, and contextually speaking, it doesn't really make sense with what we've seen. So I'm not going to say, yeah, at that point he's lying about how he felt about his daughter at that point. There's not enough to go off of, but it is something that I wanted to make note of. And there's still more coming along here, so let's keep going.
Last time you saw her, you thought how lucky you were.
Exactly. Your world shattered to thin and out.
The curtains, which had been closed, just...
World shattered. There's a micro nose shake in there as well. Again, 2 micro nose shakes in regards to this instance here. Perhaps he's feeling a level of underlying negative emotion. Would make sense contextually. It's still desynchronized with the verbal phrasing that he's using in 2 different spots here. Just again, another little small red flag on the belt of Jerry. Now we're switching back over to Kate here. Let's see how it goes.
Closed, just swung open into the room and revealed that the shutter was all the way up and the window being pushed right across. And then I just knew she'd been taken. I ran to the window. I've no idea what I expected to find or see. You know, you just hope you're going to see your child every second. Whizzed around the apartment in about 10 seconds. Again, I don't quite know because, you know, I knew in my head that someone had taken her. I don't know if I kind of hoped that maybe she was hiding in a cupboard or something. And then I just legged it out the back of the apartment. And then as soon as I saw Jerry and our friends at the table, I mean, I'm
going to go ahead and pause here. So this was an issue that many people had with the presentation from the parents, is that the immediate thing that was landed upon is that she was taken, that the young child was taken from because they saw this open window, which say we're going to go ahead and follow along with that narrative that she was taken. They didn't go through the process of checking in this new area where they were leaving their children unattended. They didn't go through the process of checking to make sure that, for instance, the window couldn't be opened from the outside. They just assumed that it couldn't be. And they left a door unlocked, but the door that they left unlocked was a large sliding glass door, which had a handle that it's easy for a young one to pull open and leave. And as young ones can be curious, and if they wake up and they don't know where their guardian is, they will oftentimes go looking. But their immediate assumption was that, no, she wouldn't have done that. She was definitely taken. And to me, that strikes me as fascinating, and I'm left wondering why they were so quick to say that she wouldn't have gotten up and left herself, especially with an unlocked door. Some of the theories that have been presented is that they gave the children, that Jerry and Kate gave the children some form of tranquilizer, sleeping medicine, something along those lines that would encourage them to not get up and do said things. So perhaps there's that. And then if that were the case, then that's a level of just neglect, that they had some questionable parental practices in regards to how they handled their children that night that made it to where it was impossible or inconceivable for the children to have left through the unlocked door, things like that. So we have some difficulties and frustrations around that in general that I feel are fairly justified. Again, for parents that are watching this video, would you have done the same? Is this something that even in your most flippant addressing of your child's safety, is that an approach that you would have taken of leaving them in an unchecked, unsecured room? Or would you have gone through maybe some safety measures before just leaving your children? Now we're going to get to the part where Kate comes back over to the friends, and she's obviously not taking it well, or she's saying that she's not taking it well. And that does seem to be corroborated by the other people present at the time, that she did not seem okay. It paints out a bit of a contrast between Kate and Jerry. We'll see what we mean.
I mean, I was just screaming, Madeleine's gone, someone's taken it.
Yeah, I mean, Kate was clearly distraught, and I jumped up, but it was kind of disbelief.
And so that's interesting to me. Kate, this is coming from the husband. The wife, the mother, is saying, child is gone, I think somebody took her. And Jerry's first response is to jump up, and then he states that he didn't believe her. Now, what strikes me as fascinating non-verbally with that he's displaying during this moment, is that he has a little brief flash of contempt coming in there when he's saying that he didn't believe her. Contempt, for those of you who aren't versed on this channel, contempt is a feeling of moral or intellectual superiority. And so he's feeling like he knows something perhaps a little bit more, or he has a level of intellectual superiority in regards to that. And then after that, he has a fair bit of activity in the corner of his nose as he's talking about how it just seemed rather preposterous that that sort of terrible thing could be happening. Those aren't the responses that you would hope to see from the father or the husband of the mother who's saying that the child is gone. Perhaps concern, fright, fear, a desire to go immediately over, something along those lines. Not, oh, I don't believe you, and I have contempt and disgust about it. It's a fascinating display that we're seeing from Jerry, and again, two different sides of a coin here from Kate and Jerry. Let's keep watching.
She can't be gone. She can't possibly. How could she be gone? It's the furthest thing from your mind. And I was saying that to Kate as we were both running.
Did you think that there must be
furthest thing? And he does a flash of a little bit of a fear expression with a pulling down to the corner of the side of the mouth there. Now with that look like that, and that's the oops look is what I like to call it. It is based out of the vein of emotion of fear, but it's often found in people who have been caught out in something, or realize something that they shouldn't realize, or know something that they shouldn't, and that pulling to the corner of the side of the mouth comes out. That still strikes me as fascinating in there as well, as he's saying she can't have gone, she can't have disappeared, and then he has this oops expression comes across his face. For me right now, I'm not seeing nearly as much that's implicative of Kate, but I'm seeing more and more that's implicative of Jerry. And that's fascinating, and we're not even to the points that really hammer that home. We're still just gathering information at this point, so let's watch.
There must be some confusion. She must be there somewhere.
Yeah. I just thought she can't have been taken. That doesn't happen. You just think it doesn't happen. And but Kate saying she's gone, someone's taken her.
People described you as cold and poker.
During that time, his response to the interviewer, even restating kind of what he's presenting there, is a no shake in that, which could be related to the unbelievable nature of it, could also be related to the thought of no, or the negative of no. It's an interesting point here. We've seen a couple other portions of this video in and of itself where he's had the micro shakes no that do desynchronize a bit from what he's saying. This one's macro, so it's more consciously controlled, but we're still left wondering what's the driving emotion behind that. Is it the negative, or is it the you would not believe? Both are plausible, but we will have to continue to gather more information as we're going through this before we can start to draw our own conclusions from it. So let's continue watching through this.
Cold and poker-faced.
I mean, I don't think I had a day for literally 18 months where I didn't have a prolonged period crying. I've learned that people judge, very readily, and what you see on camera, isn't the full story.
There were prolonged periods for several days where Kate was what my mum said was like howling like a wild animal with.
This rubs me a little bit wrong from Jerry as well. He's talking about how again, Kate is the only one during this who is displaying a level of emotional turmoil in regards to her child missing. And Jerry's response to it is even an exasperated sigh of recollecting Kate's emotional turmoil during the time, with an eye roll in there as well. You don't get the feeling of two parents being emotionally distraught about this. You get the sense that perhaps the mother is and the father is staying on this level of detached, even perhaps fed up on areas of this by the response of the other parent. It's fascinating to me, and he's going to now say in just a second that he didn't respond because he wanted to keep everything. Nobody noticed his turmoil because he kept it under the surface. Let's see that.
With grief and despair in her bedroom, and I have to say I really wasn't able to console her because I was paddling frantically below the surface.
At times you felt...
Pausing that. So I was not able to console her. That's synchronized, the not, no shake, because I was, and then he does a little mouth shrug in there, like, I don't know. Paddling below the surface, it's a fascinating thing. He's admitting that during that time, his behavior was not a supportive person. He was not being a supportive husband, which I do find fascinating. And I know that conflict within families like this, especially when it has to do with children, it can build walls in between the spouses or the parents. So there's that possibility. Again, I still find it fascinating that Jerry has maintained from the very beginning, and again, if you haven't watched the first video, go watch that. That will even add more context to this emotional detachment. Jerry has stayed emotionally detached throughout the entirety of this, and the only reason he has for that is because he said that he was processing it by himself. I have some difficulties with that, especially due to his lack of emotional seepage in general across all interviews in regards to this. He, at least with what I've seen, has shown very little to no genuine emotion in regards to it, which I say in the prior video could be in regards to their medical training. A lot of doctors are asked and required to maintain a level of composure during traumatic events because it helps them function at their job better. There is that distinct possibility. But to contrast with that, Kate is also a doctor, and she is displaying, while subdued, more emotion in regards to her child. More and more distance is being built here between Kate and Jerry, and it feels more and more telling to me. Let's continue.
You felt like two lone figures with catapults against an army. You must just feel so helpless.
Suddenly a lot of doors began to close. You know, the UK government and the authorities kind of withdrew, and there was obviously doubt, you know, amongst sectors of the general public. And we really felt hampered then. And the hardest thing, the most upsetting thing for us was that obviously impacts greatly on the search for Madeleine. You know, we need people to be helping us, to be looking for her. So at that point, you know, we felt very alone, and we felt like we were fighting a million battles, to be honest. It was very difficult to counter any kind of negativity in Portugal that was appearing in the media.
It was incredibly hard, wasn't it? We were having trial by media with misinformation, lies and smears against us, and the threat of breaking judicial secrecy if we talked about details of the investigation. I'm not sure now, but on the night, the way Kate found the room, and with the fact that we were able to raise the shutters,
I'm going to go ahead and pause here. So I'm not seeing it in this specific interview. The reason that they gave, according to the research that I found, that they did not display their emotions for the world to see in regards to the missing child was that they at least say that they were told to not show the emotional turmoil that they were under because it would give a level of sexual gratification to the person who could have possibly kidnapped Madeleine. It's true, I'm sure, that perhaps that emotional outpouring and turmoil being displayed by them could give a level of gratification to the kidnapper, which isn't a thing that you want to do, but by quote-unquote following those terms, that instruction, they presented themselves as uncaring and detached from their own situation to everybody else, including law enforcement at the time. Yeah, like I said, I don't know if that's actually shown in this, so we'll continue to watch through that and gather some.
I felt that was how the abductor had got in. We'd left that down all week. We checked the window the first day we were there. We didn't touch the curtains, had remained drawn the whole week. Just wanted to keep their room nice and cool and dark. And I went outside and I was totally aghast that I was able to lift the shutter from the outside.
So pausing here, he's just now contradicted himself. He said that when they showed up there, they checked the window. But then later on, he went outside and more or less checked the window after the incident and was surprised to find out that it can open, which then obviously just by simple logical processing means that he didn't check the window the first time. Maybe he looked at the window and assumed, but had he checked the window, he would have found out that it could have been opened both from the inside and the outside. So we're seeing some neglectful behavior again here, at very, very least, behaving irresponsibly with the children that they had under their care at the time. Again, very fascinating.
We just thought you had to use the kind of the pulley mechanism on the inside.
You shouldn't be able to.
And it was like presumed it was like a protective barrier, I guess, outside.
You shouldn't be able to raise them, but this one you could. I mean, the ludicrous thing is
pausing it there. So then they're trying to shift that burden of responsibility of, we didn't do our due diligence to make sure that the room that we're leaving our children unattended in was actually safe. So we're going to blame it on anything else that we can.
Yeah, you shouldn't even be able to open the windows that way, but this one you sure could. And so it's not our fault that we didn't do a single responsible parental thing. It's got to be perhaps the window maker's fault or the resort's fault. It's somebody else's fault. It's not ours.
Which again, that's coming a little bit more from Jerry. Kate in that as well said we assumed, but Jerry is really trying to say, no, we knew and it's their fault. Again, it's painting out a little bit more contrast between the two parents on this. Let's keep watching.
Is that Madeleine died in the apartment by an accident and we hid her body. Well, when did she have the accident and died? Because the only time she was left unattended was when we were at dinner. So if she died then, how could we have disposed or hidden her body, when there was an immediate threat? It's just nonsense. So, and if she died when we were in the apartment or fell and did, why would we cover that up?
Gets even more ludicrous that we.
So he's becoming more animated. Jerry's becoming more animated during this time, and you're seeing a lot more activity come into his eyebrows and even in the corner of his nose as he's talking about these seemingly outrageous things. And to play devil's advocate on that front, even the idea that he's presenting here that perhaps Madeleine died in the apartment and then they went and hid her body, it doesn't seem to line up timeline-wise with what occurred. So sure, I'll go with that, and I'll go along with that. And along with that, his more synchronized and emotive nonverbal communication reeks of authenticity in this area. He's showing his outrage, he's showing his frustration, but he's doing so in an area that clears his name. As soon as it gets around to a point where it's maybe more implicative towards him, we fall back into these other interesting nonverbal patterns that he has. It's fascinating to see where he is being genuine and emotive and authentic as opposed to where he's being stilted and subdued. And again, we're getting really close to this segment that it's fairly telling, and it's one of the big portions. It's a big clip that made me start reconsidering my earlier opinion. Let's watch.
Chris, that we've obviously hidden her somewhere incredibly well where nobody's found her. We hid her so well that we then decided we'd move her in the car, which we hired weeks later. And, it's just ridiculous.
People said to me early on, maybe she's been stolen to order. And I thought, don't be ridiculous. But actually, compared to everything else that's happened, that's a possibility.
Did you kill your daughter?
Again, Jerry becomes more authentic and animated. He's very interested and engaged in that narrative, which I understand. If you're not guilty of something, finding those evidences that pushes that is very invigorating. But then that also applies the question of why aren't you being more authentic and emotive during the times that it is implicative towards you? Because both are equally important. You can't just be authentic in areas where it directs attention away. You have to be authentic in both. Otherwise, You're going to raise suspicion, and there are going to be red flags. And now we're going to get to the point, the big question, which is, did you kill Madeleine? And we're going to see something interesting.
You kill your daughter?
No, never. And, there's nothing with any logic that could, you would have to start with why, how, when, who, and there's just simply, the answer to any of these things is there's nothing to suggest anything. So, no, that's an emphatic no.
Gonzalo.
That is almost textbook packing of a narrative, oftentimes done when you're feeling extremely pressured or nervous. That doesn't necessarily mean that a person is lying if they pack their narrative. When they pack a narrative, though, that is an indicator of nerves. But we're going to talk about it non-verbally speaking as well. So, did you kill your daughter? The immediate response from Kate is a microshake no. Then that would be considered more authentic. Again, for those of you that don't know, the smaller the movement non-verbally, the less likely it is to be consciously controlled. So that microshake no, immediate to that question from Kate, to me feels authentic. She says no. Then she checks in with Jerry, and Jerry proceeds to fall apart for the next several moments. As he starts packing this narrative, his immediate thing is to do a postural rechange. He does a manipulator on his face. It could be a partial eye blocking. It could be a mouth touching gesture. It is an indicator of agitation, to be sure. And then he goes through and he stammers this odd excuse of there's not no evidence and couldn't even possibly be. He takes some shuddering breaths in there. He has a lot of shrugging in there, which is an indicator of insecurity or insincerity. And then his final resolution that he has is that there's not any evidence that points towards it, so no. And then he tries to reiterate it and say that's an emphatic no. And so that entire packing of a narrative with a slew of uncertain, insecure, nonverbal communication throughout that erupts as an enormous red flag to me. A simple no, like Kate did, would have perfectly sufficed. But instead, he felt the nervous, anxious need to pack a narrative with a whole bunch of mumbo-jumbo and display so many indicators of insecurity and insincerity. And that raises a bunch of questions for me. There's very little left here. We're going to watch through that, and then I'll talk about kind of what I've landed on after the point.
Emphatic no.
Gonzalo Amaral is claiming some big cover-up with MI5 and Gordon Brown. What do you think of those claims?
Well, the least said about Gonzalo Amaral, the better.
Do you find it offensive that people are carrying on this way?
Yeah, it's caused a lot of upset and it's damaged the search.
People want to believe that something like this can't happen to them, and because the perpetrators have not been brought to justice, they can't be blamed. You can't say that, oh, that's it.
You haven't got a face, you haven't got a name, you haven't got anyone to blame. But, as you say, it's every parent's worst nightmare. It's touched everybody, I think.
You will not rest until you find your daughter, until you wrap your arms around her.
I don't believe any parent could, and I don't believe we could ever reach a point where we just think, oh, well, we've done everything now. Whilst the situation remains as it is, Madeleine's out there and she needs us to find her.
You'll keep looking forever.
We will.
Okay. So again, we're seeing two different sides emotionally from the parents here. Kate seems to have a level of genuine, authentic emotion that's being displayed. Jerry is not showing anything to that degree. They have joint offered the explanation of, oh, we were coached to not do that. And then we get to that question, the very direct, simple question at the end, did you kill your daughter? And one answers what seems to be synchronized and authentically, and the other one answers abysmally. To me, it feels so revealing. And then at the very, very end, as Kate's saying that she's out there somewhere, we're seeing a pretty substantial eye blocking, a very slow blink in there with a lip compression, with the corners of the mouth being pulled to the side. Again, to me, that I don't actually believe that Kate feels that Madeleine is out there and alive. And Jerry, I have so many more questions about than if he believes that Madeleine's alive. And this isn't just a theory that I have my nonverbal reasons to have come to this conclusion, but even with that, I found many people that were talking about how perhaps Jerry was involved in some of these pedophilic rings, that perhaps there was a little bit more know about the situation from his side of things than what was initially let on, that perhaps Kate is not as in the know of the situation. I'm not super certain about Jerry anymore. Again, at the last video, the last one that I did on this, I felt that they at very best were just being neglectful by their lack of responsibility for the children's housing and safety while they were kind of going around and drinking. And even with that, which I think I mentioned in the prior video, Kate's initial response is to leave the room that she's assuming Madeleine was just taken from, to leave that room again and leave two children that they still have in that room by themselves again, to go back out to the table. Again, just kind of reiterating this lack of responsibility or care for the well-being of the children that they have under their care. All of it, I don't know, for lack of a better word, smells funny. There's something that seems to be very off in this, and a lot of my attention now is on Jerry and why he's behaving so suspiciously during this time, even down to his nonverbals. In this video, we're going to be focusing on some of the difficulties surrounding the evidences and where they push people's direction and attention, and we'll also be analyzing a very early interview that Jerry and Kate did only a few months after the disappearance of their daughter. So for a little backstory and some of this context, from the very beginning, investigators struggled with inconsistent witness accounts and perplexing evidence. The group of friends that the McCanns had each checked on the children at different times, but many noted that their recollections didn't always line up perfectly. Who exactly checked at 9:30? Was the patio door left unlocked for ease of checking, or was it locked? These details seemed minor compared to the big question of Madeleine's fate, yet every single discrepancy fueled speculation. Portuguese police noted some inconsistencies between the friends' statements, but this isn't unusual in chaotic situations. More striking was the mystery man that was sighted carrying a child. At 9:15 p.m., a man was sighted near the McCann's room carrying a child that seemed to be of about the contemporary age with Madeleine. This sighting was initially assumed to be the kidnapper, but 6 years later, in 2013, British detectives made a startling revelation. They identified that man, and it turned out to be just an innocent British father carrying his own child back from the babysitting service. This false lead had misdirected the investigation for multiple years. Detective Chief Inspector of London's Metropolitan Police described this discovery as a revelation moment that altered 6 years of thinking. It meant that the kidnap, if it was a kidnap, likely happened later than first thought, closer to 10 p.m. when Madeleine was found missing. Another witness report gained new importance. At about 10 p.m., an Irish family, the Smiths, walking near the resort, saw a man carrying a blonde child in pajamas heading towards the beach. For a long time, this was brushed aside, but the Scotland Yard team eventually reevaluated it as potentially the actual abductor. They even released sketches of this unidentified man and subsequently got an overwhelming public response to a 2013 Crime Watch TV special. Physical evidence, too, offered mixed messages. In the weeks after Madeleine disappeared, Portuguese investigators gathered forensic samples from the apartment and surroundings. They brought in 2 specially trained British sniffer dogs, one to detect human blood, and the other to detect the scent of human cadaverine, or the smell of a dead body. In August of 2007, these dogs alerted strongly inside the McCann's apartment and on certain items even on the family's rental car, which they had hired weeks after the disappearance. The cadaver dog signaled what handlers called the scent of death on Kate McCann's clothes and on a soft toy of Madeleine's. This was a dramatic development that led Portuguese police to form a theory that Madeleine had died in the apartment and that her parents might have hidden the body somewhere. In early September September of 2007, the police interviewed Kate and Jerry for many, many hours, and both parents were declared formal suspects in the case. However, forensic laboratory results did not confirm the dogs' suspicions. The samples collected were too degraded and incomplete to make a definitive DNA match to Madeleine. In fact, a Portuguese police source acknowledged that no usable evidence could be obtained to corroborate the cadaver dog's alerts. Simply put, the initial DNA tests were inconclusive. The intriguing scent clues were suggestive, but certainly not proof of anything. They could imply that a death had occurred, but without hard evidence, it just remained one possible narrative. This clash of sniffer dogs indicating a death versus no other scientific proof or body created one of the deepest rifts in the investigation. Depending on which evidence one tends to prioritize, the interpretation of Madeleine's fate swings widely. Another example of conflicting evidence was the condition of the apartment's window shutters. Kate McCann said she found the bedroom window open and the shutter raised, suggesting that an intruder might have exited that way. Portuguese police initially reported no signs of forced entry on the shutters, leading some to doubt if the abduction could have happened through that window at all. Was the window truly a point of entry or exit, or was it just opened as a red herring? This became another point of debate in the case files and in public discussions, though it was never really definitively resolved in the evidence. In some of the basic facts of the night, a short time window, a handful of sightings, and an apparent lack of solid forensic traces left investigators grasping at possibilities. Further exasperating the already strained situation, around that time in late 2007, the Portuguese police and the British police were not always on the same page about those possibilities, thus hindering a more fluid and cohesive investigation. This was all inflamed as media across the globe became more and more intensely involved. Some outlets would share one theory as concrete fact, while another would discredit that line of thought and present an alternate theory, again as cold, hard truth, consequently muddying the proverbial waters for everyone involved. In fact, everyone seemed to have an opinion, and those that held that opinion seemed to be absolutely convinced that it was the only accurate or truthful representation of the evidence. On the note of theories and opinions, however, over the years, virtually every conceivable theory about Madeleine McCann's fate has been raised, from the credible to, honestly, the absurd. To understand the case's complexity, one must consider these competing narratives, all of which found their champions in parts of the media or law enforcement. Theory 1. Kidnapped by a stranger. The theory most vigorously pursued by British and later German police is that Madeleine was abducted by a stranger, likely a male predator, sometime around 9:30 to 10 p.m. that night. The motive proposed ranges from burglary gone wrong, maybe a thief entered the apartment, panicked when he found a child awake, to perhaps even child trafficking or sexual exploitation. Early on, some Portuguese reports speculated that she may have been taken by a pedophilic ring operating in the area. There were hundreds of sightings of blonde girls matching Madeleine's description in the following months, not only in Portugal, however, but across Europe and even in places like Morocco. Every time hope would rise, a child spotted with a suspicious man in a supermarket in Belgium, or a photograph of a lookalike girl on a woman's back in Morocco, but each and every lead proved false. The sheer number of false sightings from Portugal to North Africa to as far away as New Zealand highlighted how global this search had become and how ambiguous the trail actually was. Supporting the stranger abduction theory, aside from the eyewitness sightings, there were reports of creeper burglaries in holiday resorts. If one of these intruders took Madeleine, it might explain why no forensic trace was left, as a number of these different criminals were so adept to doing the burglaries that they would virtually leave no evidence in the other break-ins. The fact that Madeleine's younger twin sibling slept through the entire incident has been interpreted by some as evidence that perhaps it was a stealthy kidnapper who removed Madeleine without waking the other two. Others have speculated that the twins' deep sleep might also indicate that there may have been some sedation happening, which is another rabbit hole of conjecture since the twins' hair was not tested until much later, which then meant that it could yield no clear answers. British and Portuguese police in 2013 through 2014 interviewed several men who were known for break-ins or child abuse in the area. Some of these individuals were cleared, but at least one died before he could honestly be fully questioned, so no definitive suspect emerged at that time. This theory, however, got its strongest boost with the identification of Christian Bruckner in 2020, as he had a history that fit the profile of a lone predator and was physically placed in the vicinity. German investigators favor this theory and have essentially treated the case as a homicide with Bruckner as the perpetrator. However, recent reports indicate that he is soon to be released from prison for a prior rape that he had been found guilty of in the area, leaving the prosecution scrambling for fear of him disappearing in the wind upon his release. Along with this, attention has also recently been turned towards the McCann's friend, David Payne, who was the last person to have been reported seeing her alive. Another friend of the McCanns also stated that she saw/overheard Payne and Mr. McCann speaking inappropriately about Madeleine. This, coupled with his oddly flaky behavior, unreliable memory on the case, and recorded uncomfortable verbiage regarding his thoughts of Madeleine, has caused many to feel suspicious of his involvement. However, there again has been a lack of verified evidence directly linking him to Madeleine's disappearance, and he has not yet been charged. Theory 2 is parental involvement via accident or perhaps cover-up. This is the theory that Portuguese police and detectives leaned on hardest towards late 2007, that Madeleine had perhaps died in the apartment, perhaps in an accident, and her parents concealed her death and staged a kidnapping to avoid culpability. It's important to state up front that Kate and Jerry McCann have always vehemently denied this, and no charges were ever brought against them. Moreover, they were formally cleared by Portugal's own Attorney General in 2008 when the case was archived for lack of evidence. Nonetheless, this theory gained a lot of traction in the public sphere due to a collection of tantalizing clues supporting it: cadaver dog alerts and the DNA traces in the McCann's apartment and rental car, and what some saw as inconsistencies or implausibilities in the parents' accounts. Some critics asked, for example, why the McCanns and friends checked on the kids in intervals rather than just using the resort babysitting service that was provided, insinuating that this routine was concocted perhaps after the fact to mask negligence or something even worse. The former lead detective of the case became the chief proponent of this theory after he was removed from the case. In his book, The Truth of the Lie, the detective alleged that Madeleine died in an accident, perhaps from a fall or an overdose of sedative, and that the McCanns faked an abduction in order to cover it all up. He pointed to the dogs' alerts and the fact that Kate McCann had so quickly washed Madeleine's favorite toy directly after her disappearance as suspicious. The McCanns, for their part, call the detectives' claims baseless and say those accusations deeply harmed the search for Madeleine by turning attention away from the actual kidnapper. They won an initial liberal judgment against him, with the judge agreeing that the allegations were defamatory and hurtful. However, this was later overturned on appeal, not because the claims were proven in any way, but rather on the principle of free expression. In the court of public opinion, this theory still lingers, however. This being said, it's worth noting that every official investigation active today considers the McCanns as not suspects, but in fact victims. Inquiries by British police found no evidence the parents were involved at all, and some British detectives even praised the McCanns' cooperation over the years. Kate and Jerry have at times confronted these suspicions head-on, with Kate even publishing a memoir in 2011 addressing the pain of being accused. In order to provide an impartial and balanced view, it's clear that while this theory cannot be fully disproven without knowing what happened, the weight of evidence gathered so far does not seem to support that Jerry and Kate are involved, and that in fact they have been officially exonerated. There are less prevalent theories, however. For example, maybe Madeleine wandered off on her own and succumbed to an accident in the dark, such as maybe like falling into a well or a construction site or into the ocean, any sort of possibility there. The thorough searches of the area make this seem a little bit more unlikely, as no trace of her was ever found nearby, though many have also stated that to be fully comprehensive in search efforts in the area is nearly impossible due to the multiple factors, not the least of which is the area's complex topography and geological features. Another theory that floated was that she was targeted for adoption by someone who just really wanted a child. This was fueled by early reports of strangers photographing children at the resort the week that she disappeared, possibly casing for victims. However, no solid evidence ever emerged of an illegal adoption ring in the area. Over the years, there have also been a few people who falsely claimed to be Madeleine herself, with the recent being a woman in 2023 on social media. But a DNA test quickly disproved the claim. Each time, the story flares up, it underscores the public's desperate wish for closure, and then fades again when proven false. Given the numerous theories, it's no wonder the case feels so ambiguous. We have one set of facts, but multiple sets of interpretations. The challenge for investigators and for the public trying to understand has been deciding which narrative fits best and is backed by the most credible evidence. Is it an abduction by a prowler as supported by eyewitnesses and the Smiths and suspect behavior in the area, or was it just a tragic accident covered up as argued by some detectives, citing forensic hints? Perhaps it's something else entirely. With each theory, some pieces of the puzzle make sense, while others seem not to. And that's the crux of why this case is still unsolved. No theory fully aligns with all of the evidence at hand. And yet, amidst the confusion, investigators continue to persist. As recently as spring of 2023, teams were out in the field probing a reservoir and collecting samples. The German prosecutor hinted that results are foreseeable as they continue to build their case. There is still hope that one day a definitive answer will emerge, perhaps a confession or a piece of DNA evidence or even Madeleine herself against all of the odds. Until then, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann remains an open case and an enduring cautionary tale about how elusive the truth can be. As I've continued to delve deeper into this case, I have found myself feeling perplexed by the various evidences as well. I do feel the draw to the behavior of the tenured cadaver dogs as they marked the apartment and the rental car, and I find many of the instances around the presented timeline and events to be indicative of foul play of some form. I do have questions as to why Jerry and Kate opted to leave their children as they did despite having access to resort babysitting services. I find it interesting that the other children were so slow to wake even during the initial moments of the panicked search for Madeleine, possibly eluding at the sedation. The group of people that believe that Bruckner is the culprit is also quite enticing to me, especially considering that the German law enforcement heavily alluded to substantial evidence supporting the claim. As the evidence continues to pull me into every single possible direction, I'm left looking at the behaviors I can observe. While the behavior of the McCann parents seems to be suspicious at many turns, I do also have to remind myself of the gray in nonverbal analysis. I find myself feeling frustrated that there's still no black and white method for determining authenticity and deceit in body language until we can literally see into a person's mind in order to understand what they are actually thinking and feeling. We're stuck with a disconnect between what a person says they think and feel and experience and what the reality of the situation actually is. While the contextually recent study of kinesics, nonverbal communication, and body language are beneficial, the current hard limitations they have add complexity and nuance through the analyses that I often find a little bit frustrating. However, though the study and practice are in fact limited, that doesn't downplay the importance of the information they can provide. Data is, in fact, data, and in situations like these where the details are shrouded in mystery, the more data that can be collected, the better. With that in mind, we will be analyzing the nonverbal communication of Jerry and Kate during this interview that they did with Sky News on August 10th of 2007, which is only a few months after the disappearance of their daughter. We'll be looking for any points of nonverbal desynchronization, positive or negative spikes from their body's behavioral baseline, contradicting or problematic verbal patterns, and revealing microexpressions in order to gain a better understanding of the parties involved. As a final reminder before we begin into the analysis, this video is meant for education and entertainment purposes only. Anything stated here is simply my educated opinion and should not be used in any way as professional or legal evidence. This all being said, let's go ahead and start the analysis.
Kate and Jerry, thank you for joining us on Sky News. Over the past 100 days, you've conducted a phenomenal awareness campaign, which has led to various possible sightings, which have later been dismissed. Just take us through the emotional experience you go through from the moment that someone says, I'm definite that I've seen Madeleine, to when it's discounted.
All right, going to go ahead and pause here, just making note of a few things. Obviously, this is an older video. It's pretty rough quality, so bear with that. It will also limit a little bit as to what I can see non-verbally, especially when it comes down to the micro-expression side of things. Those are pretty minute when they come across the face, so there might be some complexity with that. That being said, this question is going to be centered around the emotional state that they're feeling, what they're experiencing as they're going through this. So I want to be able to pay attention. Are they able to relate emotionally to what they are speaking about? Or is this something that they have fully distanced themselves from, even at this point, which is only 4 months after the disappearance of their daughter? Let's see.
I mean, the main thing for us is knowing if the sighting is credible or not, really. To be honest, we don't go through that emotional roller coaster with regards to the sightings. You know, the only thing that we'll be happy for is when we know it's definitely Madeleine, but we don't go through the ups and downs of that. I mean, the reassuring thing for us is that it implies that people are still looking for Madeleine, and that's really important and encouraging.
All right, so throughout this, I do find it interesting that even verbally speaking, Kate's response to what's your emotional experience with this is, we're not really going through the ups and downs with that, which, fair, maybe... I have difficulty with this. In my brain, I feel like I would still probably be pretty emotionally a wreck. But I also know that in my brain, in saying that presents a bias. So just because I would be probably pretty emotionally up and down and feeling pretty turbulent doesn't mean that they will. It is still a fascinating behavioral point that they are stating very clearly that they're not feeling that emotional state. Now, there are some complexities that go into why they might be stating these things as they were, not the least of which is that they don't want to incriminate themselves or give any form of pleasure to an abductee if that were the case. So there are some possibilities for that. It is still fascinating. Now, throughout that as well, Kate is shaking her head no, but that is synchronized with what she's saying, as she's saying we're not feeling all these different things. Now, at the very end, you see this little bit of a lopsided shrug come in here. Now, that lopsided shrug indicates a level of perhaps insincerity or insecurity in what's being said. Doesn't mean that it's a lie, but there's not as much confidence behind it. So for me, I would want to hone in onto that little point there. Maybe there is a little issue there, but it's, again, nothing that's pointing towards their guilt. It is simply just gathering more data. It seems as though Jerry might start to respond here, so let's see.
And encouraging.
I think it's self-protection, really, that if you were up and down like that all the time, you just wouldn't be able to function. So it comes back, as Kate says, to the credibility.
That's been a tough...
Okay, going to pause there. Jerry's face stays pretty much the same throughout all of his interviews. His eyebrows are furrowed quite regularly in his resting state. So they're drawn together a little bit and they are lowered a little bit, and that gives him almost a little bit of a scowl as he's speaking. But that is simply how his face rests. Along with that, you're seeing a little bit of crinkling around the corners of his nose, again, in his resting state. So as that's part of his baseline, we can't look at any time that he's looking like he might be feeling disgusted or angry by something and being like, oh, well, he's obviously feeling that, because there is the distinct possibility that he is just returning to his baseline. Now, the reason that he gives does cognitively make sense. If you do allow yourself to go through those emotional swings like that, you can't function. And if anybody has gone through a trauma, it's very difficult to allow yourself to just ride those emotions constantly, because it can really rule your life at the time. So many people will try to ignore those emotional states, which can cause problems in and of themselves, but it's not something that's unheard of there. That being said, again, their complete emotional removal from the case in general has always struck me as fascinating, but many people have pointed out that their ability to do that categorization in their brain could be due to the fact that both of them are medical personnel. They're both doctors. They both have to deal with the stressful and intense situations, so perhaps this is just them being able to do so here in the way that they know best and have been trained to do. Maybe it's just their coping mechanism. Regardless, we're making note of what their patterns are. Let's continue.
It's been a tough week for you. The Portuguese press in particular seem to be conducting what could be described as a smear campaign against you and attempting to put the blame of Madeleine's disappearance on you. Where are they getting this information from, and how do you react to it?
We don't read Portuguese, so I think that's the first thing to say, that we haven't read the accounts firsthand. There does seem to be a consistency this week and claims from police sources, but to be perfectly frank, we don't know how much of that is true and how much of it's speculation. What we do know is that speculation certainly doesn't help us. We know a number of the facts, and I have not seen any evidence or know of any direct evidence to have changed our viewpoint to what we've held for the last 100 days. And, we've said all along, and everything we've done during the last 100 days is focused on the belief that Madeleine was alive when she was abducted. And certainly we were encouraged in that respect. And everything we've done is to increase the chances of her being returned.
All right, so throughout that, I wanted to pay attention to how his verbal pattern was flowing, the cadence of his words. Did he have any areas of stopping or halting? Did he have any areas where he had to reconsider or rephrase things? And there were only a couple points where I heard some perhaps stutters or stammers or filler words. But then there was one point verbally where he was saying that there hasn't been any evidence, just swaying them in a certain direction, and then he rephrased it and said there hasn't been any direct evidence. And I do find that verbal pattern fascinating, that he does say evidence and then he does make the intentional decision to say direct evidence, which is more specific, which leaves me questioning perhaps there was something that was more circumstantial that had come out at that point that had pushed their attention in one direction or another. But non-verbally speaking, as he's going through this, there weren't any areas where he started falling apart. He didn't have any areas where he started lighting up from his baseline and suddenly you see a bunch of activity or self-soothers or anything along those lines. You also didn't see any areas where he started to shut down, where he had been moving and now he's suddenly frozen still. In regards to perhaps his gaze, it stays consistently within the same pattern. He looks up on occasion, but most of the time he's looking down and blinking as he's trying to recollect and come up with his words. This is a very common nonverbal pattern to see when a person is trying to come up with things to say or a way to respond to something. It's not always indicative of a lie or a deceit, in that, especially in this area, it's consistent throughout. He doesn't have an area where it's spiked from a different pattern from before. And so often in nonverbal communication, that's one of the big indicators, are these changes in the nonverbal communication. Something triggers a change. That's where you have to hone in and pay attention. In this area, there weren't too many areas that looked to be that way outside of that little verbal pattern of the evidences.
Returned.
Amanda, we've been through and are going through that much pain with not having Madeleine with us, that anything that's written or said really is just a minor hurdle in comparison, and we'll ride through it. We still strongly want to do what we believe is the right thing to do, what's the right thing for Madeleine, what's the right thing for us, and at the minute that is to stay, and we're not going to be bullied into going home,
All right, throughout that, brings a valid point forward that if you've just lost your child, kind of what everybody else is saying doesn't matter as much, which is a reason, if a little bit light of a reason, for their perhaps emotional separation or just not caring too much about what's being stated or said at the time. And then non-verbally speaking from Kate, again, we're seeing this looking kind of down while thinking and occasionally checking in or looking up to be able to make sure that the interviewer is registering what's being said or paying attention or hasn't missed anything, things like that. But then down to the movements of Kate's head during that time, they're also synchronized with what she's saying verbally, which that does push me towards that authenticity during these areas. It's more difficult to be synchronized non-verbally in your totality when you're trying to come up with a false narrative. So if you're pushing some sort of lie and you're focused on that narrative, it makes it more difficult for your body to fall in line naturally with that. Where, as opposed to if you're telling the truth, your body will support that. That's not always the case. None of this is a 100% rule of thumb. However, it is a basic guideline that you can work off of, especially if you consider the rest of the context around it as well.
We've witnessed the support that you've had in Luge, but there is out there criticism, not least from your hometown, the website for the local newspaper, the comments page, a barrage of comments that were described as spiteful, of defamatory. Were you surprised by that? And how did you feel about it?
I'm just going to go ahead and pause here before they respond. I'm not certain how they respond to this. Putting myself in their shoes, I would feel lightly surprised. That would be my response, is that, yeah, on some level I would be surprised. However, especially since I have had so much time on the internet, I would also have a bit of a jaded response of understanding, like, yeah, it's surprising, but also not too surprising. Since this is so early on, the internet wasn't as prevalent as it is now, maybe they're not as jaded as of yet. Let's see how they respond to it.
Again, I haven't actually read the comments and I have no idea who's written them. We've used the internet to try and raise Madeleine's awareness. I don't know who the people are or what they've specifically written other than the broad terms that you've got.
Oh, what the motives are, because anything written like that is really unhelpful.
At the end, whatever anyone thinks.
Interesting. So what I'm noticing from Jerry during this time is he actually seems to be a bit tired. This is not a nonverbal movement. It's just how his face is falling. You could see it around his eyes. He looks tired, which is actually a little bit different than what I've seen in so many of the other interviews that I've looked of his. He never seems to be that exhausted. So I'm wondering, perhaps this is just a small actual tell of his mental state at this moment. He might be exhausted by what's going on. Could be a little crack in the fairly resolute facade that he has consistently throughout all of these interviews. Now, what I find fascinating about Kate is that she's allowing some of her frustration to get in here, because Jerry's obviously still talking. He's in the middle of a sentence and she starts to hop in, and her breath is also quickening, which you can hear after she responds and cuts in there. So knowing that she's feeling a little bit frustrated about it, to me, I'm wondering if perhaps she has in fact been looking at some of the comments at this point and is feeling that anger and frustration. So it could be something to where perhaps she did the crime, her and Jerry did the crime, and the comments are frustrating because they're pushing and they're picking away at that, and that would spark that anger. But also on that same coin, that frustration could be centered around the fact that maybe she and Jerry didn't do the crime, and these people are still picking, and it's pushing in regards to the actual effectiveness of the investigation. Both of those do make sense in that context, and so far with this interview, there hasn't been much that's pushing me towards suspicion of them. So I've done 2 videos on them. On the first video, I landed on the conclusion that, well, I think that at very best, they're very negligent parents in this case, that they made a horrific choice in how they took care of their kids, and they paid a horrific price for it. Then I did another video because I found footage of them responding to some fairly incriminating questions in very complex ways. And I still feel like the way that they responded to those questions was suspicious. And there were a whole number of reasons. If you haven't seen that, you can go and check out why those were. But even considering that, to also play fully fair with that, the responses could have still just been centered around the agitation of being asked these intense questions when they themselves feel like it's not worth it because they weren't, in fact, involved. So this is still complex, and now we have another scenario here where it's not pushing as heavily towards their guilt. So again, you get to watch live as I continue to be pulled back and forth, even behaviorally, as evidences come out and as more interview footage is tracked down and seen. It continues to be muddy, so we're going to continue to try to gather as much information as we can.
Of our actions, ultimately, and our only focus is trying to find Madeleine. And, there's an innocent child missing. That's, what anyone thinks, that's the key thing. Madeleine is missing, and we're just doing our absolute best to maximise the chances of her being.
That part I do find a little bit difficult. So the reasons that I find that difficult is because suddenly there are spikes in his nonverbal communication. He's been at rest for a bit, and now he's spiking. He starts shaking his head a lot more as he's saying that there's a missing child, and that is a contradiction. It's possible desynchronization there, that he's shaking his head no while he's saying that there is a missing child. Now that also could be maybe he's shaking his head no because of the negative emotion around that. Possibly. It is interesting nevertheless. And then along with that, we see a pretty substantial shrug in there as well, again while he's talking about Madeleine being missing. And that missing portion seems to be the thing that is giving him a little bit of psychological hesitation. Does he at this point maybe believe that she's not missing, she's dead? Does he know at this point that she's not missing, she's dead? It raises questions, to be sure, but it is a spike in his nonverbal communication. Then along with that, verbal pattern-wise, he refers to Madeleine being missing as a child being missing, which could just be a phrasing that he's using there, but some verbal analysis experts have talked about how when a person shifts from using directly possessive verbiage of whatever is being spoken about, my child or Madeleine by name, something along those lines, and they start using the or that or this or over there kind of language while referring to somebody. So in this case, the child or a child being generic, it could be him making an attempt to separate himself from the disappearance of his own daughter because he's possibly complicit in something around it. There are complexities, to be sure.
Has ever been found.
And anything negative that's written, we've had thousands to counteract that, Amanda. I mean, you'd probably hear, but we've had that much support from people. I don't think we can say thank you enough, really. I mean, that's been so important. And that...
I'm going to go ahead and pause here. So Kate has done 2 rapport building techniques here recently, and that's using the first name of the person that is interviewing them. It's centered around this, you're familiar with your first name, so people that are closer to you will use your first name, and so you can use this to build rapport with people that you haven't met or don't know as much. We don't know the relationship between this interviewer and Jerry and Kate, but Kate has tried a couple times to build rapport with the interviewer, Amanda. So that is fascinating. During that time also, we see a pretty substantial no shake as she's saying, we've received thousands of positive feedbacks and interactions and things like that. Now that's a very overt no shake. Again, there's the possibility of that being desynchronized, but with any movement of the body, the more overt it is, the more easily consciously controlled it is. So if it's smaller, it's less likely to be controlled. It's more likely to be like a subconscious movement. So since it's very overt, we're left wondering, is this an odd point of desynchronization that's just embellished? Or maybe it's related to the you would not believe how many of these positive comments we have received. That makes more sense contextually, and it is the easier of those 2 answers. And so oftentimes the answer that is most simplistic is correct, but we can't rely on that 100%. So it's just more data that we've gathered here as we're going through this.
And that is the main thing, really, that far outweighs anything negative.
Luge itself, a very relaxed, safe feeling resort, and obviously you felt relaxed and safe enough to leave the children to sleep while you went and ate within the complex. Is that something that you'd done on other nights? Is it something you were getting a feeling other holiday makers were doing?
I can't really comment about, it's well known that we were dining at the tapas bar 50 yards away. And
all right, gonna go ahead and pause here. So this is the first time that we've seen a manipulator come up from Jerry, and it's in regards to a little bit more confrontational of a question. It wasn't posed confrontationally, but it has some confrontational connotation to it due to the media frenzy around it and all of the allegations that had been thrown out at the time. So Jerry's response is to do a pretty substantial manipulator up here that doesn't seem to be warranted anywhere else. He hasn't been sniffing, he hasn't had any other areas of his nose itching, so it's fascinating that that crops up here. And now these manipulators, especially around the mouth, can be indicative of a few things, not the least of which is that you're saying something that perhaps you might not want to say, or something that you feel like maybe you shouldn't say, so perhaps a lie would be an instance of that, but it could also just be not wanting to address some sort of complex accusation or allegation. There are plenty of reasons for it, but that coming in there is fascinating. And then along with that, you see a little bit of postural rechanging and checking in from Kate. This question about their decision to just leave their kids in their room, which many arguably agree was not a good idea at the time or any time. This question of, was that something that you did regularly, obviously rubs them a little bit the wrong way. So they are feeling defensive in this. That does make sense, even if they're innocent, but it is still something to make note of as we're going on through this.
And can't comment too much in terms of our patterns and our routines, given the fact that that's subject to the investigation. But
I've said before, we both said, if we'd had to think for 1 second that this was taking a risk, it wouldn't have happened. So, I mean, I think that says how safe we felt,
I mean, it was incredibly quiet family orientated, we're incredibly close, and you know, we did feel incredibly safe here.
That doesn't necessarily actually line up with what the evidence said at the time. The resort wasn't the most unsafe resort by any stretch of the imagination, but there were also plenty of reports of not so safe activities going on in and around the resort. It's not totally family safe and oriented what they were saying there. And again, we're seeing a lot of nose shaking. They're looking down to the side. We can't necessarily rely on those in this interview to be able to say, oh, they're feeling uncertain or insecure in this area. It's just something that we have to pay attention to, see if it strays or if there's something that happens differently. I just happen to have a little bit of issue with their presentation about the safety of the resort, and it feels a little bit like they're just making excuses for themselves. And even Kate says, if we had even thought for a little bit that there was some sort of risk, then we wouldn't have, which again, I think she was saying that as a thing that was positive for them, but realistically, that just feels like a little bit more revealing of their negligence, is that they didn't even consider the fact that it could be unsafe to leave their kid in a room by themselves 50 yards away, something like that. And then I also do find it fascinating that they refuse to talk about their own behavioral patterns. He does chalk it up to it's part of the investigation, and maybe that's genuinely part of it. Another possibility to that is that they don't want to talk about their patterns because it could, again, reveal a little bit more negligence, which, as we're going through this, it seems as though negligence is definitely starting to fit more and more and more and more. Negligence that they themselves are aware of, that they might even have a pattern to, not necessarily that they did something outside of just not taking care of their kids appropriately. Anyhow.
And judging on the letters that I've had, I've had so many supportive letters from families, from other mothers, and they've said, Kate, we've done that, we do that, who'd have ever thought that something as horrible as that would happen,
It is incredibly rare what's happened to us, but I think, with the way we've talked about it before, it felt very similar to dining in your garden. And I know that, have you ever left a child unattended for any length of time, whether it be you're downstairs and the child's upstairs, or you went to the garage, if we could turn back the clock, and rewind, of course we would.
We're just sorry we weren't there.
So this is fascinating to me. Kate uses the manipulation of playing the numbers game. Everybody says that they do this, so it's not our fault. Which, to play devil's advocate on that front, yes, in those times, people assumed the world to be a much safer place, largely because they didn't have the interconnectivity or the ability to communicate all of the times that it's not. So many people lived in a level of ignorance, assuming that the world was much safer than it actually was, sometimes leading to, while ignorant, not malicious mistakes like this. So there is that possibility. She does play a little bit of the numbers game. She's trying to disperse a little bit of the heat by doing so. It's not, don't focus just on me. Lots of people say that they have done this, so don't focus just on me. Now, on the other side, Jerry does a little bit of a different kind of manipulation here, in that he tries to draw a comparison between something that is not the same. He's saying it's almost the same as eating a meal in your garden or in your yard right by your house. Like you're eating next to your place, and it's kind of like the same as leaving your kids inside your house, which maybe spatially could be if you have a 50-yard garden, but realistically, no, that's not the same. Leaving your child in your house while you're in your yard or your garden is not the same as leaving your child in your hotel room while you're 50 yards away drinking and having a meal that you can barely even see the room, let alone hear or get to it quickly. So there are some differences there. They are trying to manipulate a little bit. Again, this can make sense if they're innocent and they just don't want to receive as much heat, but it also makes sense if they're guilty, especially if they're guilty of being negligent, which it seems arguably that they are. So let's continue.
Just sorry we weren't there at that minute.
In terms of staying in Portugal, you've both said from the start that you're not going home until Madeleine is safely back with you. Are you both equally as adamant about that? Because there have been some suggestions that Kate, you're the one that really wants to stay, and Jerry perhaps not so much. What do you see as the benefits of staying? And is it true that perhaps you want to stay more?
I think we both want to find Madeleine, and we want to do everything possible to help, and we felt staying close to the investigation and trying to move that on and cooperate was a good thing. That's, this week and the week before highlights how important that is. It would have been a lot more difficult to progress things if we'd been back in the UK. I think from some practical aspects, in terms of efficiency, I could see benefits.
I just want to pause. Again, he does that pretty substantial manipulator, same place. They don't seem to be related to same verbal concepts. He's not saying the same idea and using this manipulator for each of those, so it's not something that I could rely on that being a 2-point system for that. This is another area where he's used that. Now I need to be able to have a third portion to be able to see, was this manipulator that I've seen now in 2 different places, is it just an itch? Is there another area that it could line up with something else and help us add some clarity to these other ones? I did want to make note of that as it's going through. Another thing I want to make note of is that the interviewer has posed a question that could in fact somehow drive a bit of a wedge between Kate and Jerry, and that she's saying, oh, maybe Kate wanted to go home or wanted to stay and you wanted to go home, what have you, posing this possible wedge. And so I wanted to pay attention to both of their body language to be able to see if they have any form of harmony together during this style of question. And a way to be able to see that would be with any check-ins visually. Oftentimes, if a person is feeling close to another or feeling like they need to be on the same page with somebody else, you'll see a check-in. They'll go and they'll look as the person speaking. So if Kate had not, through that entire instance that Jerry was speaking, to me, that would seem a little bit more suspicious. Every other time that Jerry's been speaking, nearly every other time, Kate has been checking in or looking in as he's speaking, just showing that she's paying attention to him, maybe on the same page, something along those lines, not verbally. If she didn't do that here, then that would let me know that there was perhaps a little bit more contention between the two of them at this point. However, despite this being a question that sets them up, it primes them for having a wedge, they don't show that wedge taking effect, at least so far. That is a positive thing for them. It means that they're at this point, and it's 4 months in, no doubt tons of stress, they are still at least presenting themselves as on the same page and approaching it together, which would be considered a positive thing for the parents of a missing child to be together, joined as they're going about their search, what have you. Let's continue.
Benefits of going home, but emotionally, until we've done everything, and we need to know what's happened.
Is it difficult for you?
Also during that, you hear Jerry's breathing increase. He starts to have a little bit sharper increases in breathing. Again, perhaps this is because this question was centered around possibly driving a wedge like that. He could be feeling a little bit of that agitation, nervousness. It is fascinating.
Seeing, because now, Luge itself is it's in full swing for holiday season. Is it hard to be in your situation surrounded by people on holiday?
I just think every day's hard, to be honest. I don't think that's really made it any harder for me. I just think every day without Madeleine is very hard.
I'm gonna go ahead and pause there before Jerry kicks in. Quite a pause there before the response, which I get. I can kind of get why Jerry and Kate might have some weird feelings around that. Like they don't need to start up any beef with any of the people that are just having a holiday, so why would they really present that as being an issue? But what I will say is that when this question is being posed, you could first see Jerry do it ever so slight micro head nod yes, which to me kind of makes me feel like perhaps he was feeling some of that contention with the people around, but the other possibility is that he was just nodding to show that he's acknowledging the question that was being asked. That doesn't seem as likely. It does seem as though this might be something that he did in fact feel that way. Let's see if his response backs that up at all.
I think earlier on I was very conscious that, perhaps our grief and misery may have been affecting other people, and I was not trying to force that on them. I was conscious of that, but our own kids help us keep our feet in the ground, and they give us a lot of joy, and we have to give them love and attention that they deserve as well. So, and I'm not seeing other people enjoying themselves. I don't, that's the way it should be.
Now, your campaign has been...
So he does fall apart a little bit during that response, and then at the end there, yeah, it could be, and he trails up a little bit. Perhaps there's a little bit of agitation or nervousness around that. So he does stick to, no, people should be able to just have a good time, and that's how it should be. but non-verbally speaking around that there are enough spikes in his baseline that push me to feel that perhaps he was feeling some contention. Whether or not he's comfortable with it or comfortable saying in this specific interview really doesn't matter. The question itself doesn't really have any importance for the grand scheme of things. What it benefits for us here is that we get to see him respond in yet another scenario with more information, gathering more nonverbal data. But realistically speaking, guilty or not guilty, who cares how they felt about everybody else at the place having a good time? It's just neither here nor there.
The campaign has been unprecedented. What's next?
Well, to mark the 100 days, I'll be launching the YouTube channel called Don't You Forget About Me, which is a channel for missing children. And there's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes on that. And I think it's a fantastic idea, and we're launching it in collaboration, obviously, with the International Centre for Missing and Exploited Children and Google themselves, who will be hosting it via YouTube. And
both of whom have been incredibly supportive and just welcome the idea. So,
is this an?
That's cool. That's good. That is something that I do find as a positive thing. However, it can be it can be suspicious. I'll explain what I mean. But seeing that they're wanting to do things, they're wanting to find more efforts, to put people together, to make more groups, to do things, that is a positive thing. If they had just given up at this point, or they were like, everybody else can handle it, we're just taking a step back, those sorts of responses, that could be a little bit more suspicious in my opinion. But since they're like, no, we want to do these things, we want to do this and that and this and that, that could be positive. However, what many people have brought up is that if somebody is guilty in a case, say it's like a friend or just somebody close by, they will oftentimes want to stay close to it. And then maybe even help out in things like the searches or some of the efforts like that, because they want to keep better tabs on the entirety of the situation, which is most easily done by staying close to the case itself. Could be happening there. Not positive on that. There's definitely no evidence that's pointing towards that, but it is something to just make note of as we're going on through this.
Is this an indication, going on at a wider scale like this, that perhaps your hopes are fading for Madeleine in any way, in that you're giving it, putting it on a much wider scale rather than this just being about finding Madeleine, about finding other missing children?
No, I think, from quite early on, we've obviously wanted to know a little bit more about the scale of the problem. And it's massive, actually. I didn't realise how little I knew, really. And I think knowing that, it's very hard to turn a blind eye to it, and we just felt if there was anything, obviously at the minute our priority is Madeleine, but we just felt if there's anything that we could do that might help other children, that might make the world that little bit, even if it's a tiny bit safer for children, then something good has come out of it.
I think it's something tangible that could benefit other people and give renewed interest to other missing kids as well, and a medium that younger people use, and tens of millions of people use YouTube. There were over 229 videos of Madeleine on it already.
About 6 weeks ago.
So it's incredible.
And Kate, finally.
Gonna go ahead and pause there. There's only a few seconds left in this. There's the possibility that Jerry and Kate are trying to present an altruistic mask in order to subvert people's attention or some of the heat that they're receiving from this. They could be like, well, I have, more or less, we have done this terrible thing, and be that negligence or something far worse. And so now they're being like, but we've started this good movement or this YouTube channel. Like, we're doing these positive things for the benefit of everybody. So please don't be like looking at us as if we're the bad guys, because look at the good things that we're doing. There is that possibility. I don't necessarily find that as the likely response or the likely reason for what they're doing here. To me, their reasoning does make some sense, though the interviewer's question of, does this indicate that you've already lost some hope, still holds some weight. Like, if they're already like, well, we've started a center for all missing, or a channel for all missing children everywhere, then it's felt a little bit less concentrated on Madeleine. Perhaps they've already given up hope at this point. So I get where that question's coming from. I don't necessarily believe that because Jerry and Kate started this channel and started these things that they didn't care as much at the time, but there is definitely that possibility. It's still just more data.
If Madeleine could hear you now, what would you say to her?
I mean, I love you. She knows that. She knows how much I love you, how much we both love her.
And we're still looking for her.
That's an interesting question and a difficult one to respond to, I would add. I understand some of the emotional response that Kate gave to that with the little laugh in there. The laugh could also be her trying to relieve her own tension intrinsically. If she's feeling some emotions well up there, doing a little laugh and looking off to the side like that could help her feel less like she's about to fall apart, sort of thing. And then you can also still hear that emotion come in at the end of her statement, which is, I love you. But also with that, it's a fairly dismissive way that she responds to it. I love you. I love her. She knows I love you. Something like that. Now, is that because she doesn't have any emotional connection to the situation? I mean, judging by the other interviews that we've seen, they do have a consistently repeating pattern of emotional distancing. But it could also be for their own sake, as they even mentioned in this. If they're emotionally distancing themselves from this case, then anything that they respond is going to feel a little bit disingenuous because they're genuinely just, they're distancing themselves. And that might not even be because of guilt. And therein lies the rub with nonverbal communication, is that you can't just look at it and be like, oh, it's a black and white. She did this, she said this, so it definitely means this, and that means exclusively that she's lying or exclusively that she's telling the truth. It just cannot function that way. We don't have the science for it. We're working on it, but it's not there yet. I'm looking forward to the day that we can. Unfortunately, not yet. So with this little interview that we just went through here, considering all of the evidence that we know, all of the updates that have been recently brought forth, all of the context that we've been able to gather, the simplest answer and the most likely answer is that they're negligent, that the parents are negligent, that they did not take care of their child in the way that they should have, and now they're paying and will continue to pay for the rest of their lives. So many questions that I still have. I don't know. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments of this video, especially if I've missed something that could help add some more context to it, some more weight to it. If you like this video, hit subscribe and ding the bell, do all those things. But without further ado, that's all that I've got for today. My name is Logan, and you have been oh so awesome as you always are, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.